Welcome back, everybody. It's another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas football YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined today by Anwar Richardson. He's back from Florida.
Yes.
Not even a full vacation, just a mini stop and stay. But
Vacation.
How was it?
It was good. The great part is, when you live somewhere, you don't necessarily do all the touristy things, but then when you go back and visit, you don't mind doing the corny stuff that you would look down on when you lived there. So it was great going to the boys to a pool resort, and it was like we had a water park every day. Went to medieval times, took your recommendation, but we did do medieval times and ate with our hands. And, I think they're politically correct now because you can't call them wenches, but still the boys love that. And so, it's great. It's great for my son who was 3 years old to get on a plane and be able to be like, oh my God, there's clouds and everything. It was a fantastic time. So what it showed me is it's time for me to do more vacations with the boys.
Do you know what politically correct thing I've learned recently?
Which is?
Because I've been shopping in this new home of ours and looking for new bedroom stuff.
Uh-huh.
Do you know that you're not allowed to say master bedroom anymore?
I have heard that. I have heard you cannot say that. I have heard.
I was at a store yesterday where a woman got in trouble by her superior for not calling it the primary bedroom.
Oh.
And I was like, well, wait a minute, what? And then I went and I looked it up and I was like, I had no idea. I guess I should have asked a question everyone. I should have. Why do they call it the? I just had never, you start thinking about it. There are some sinister overtones to it.
Sure.
But I had never put two and two together. But I digress. Let's talk a little Texas football. Primarily, look, it's June 1st. So you've got the situation with recruiting is somewhat back to normal. Whatever that means, kids are now allowed to take visits. We're going to see over the course of this month a slew of official visits and unofficial visits. And it started literally on June 1st. Yesterday, Texas held its first official visitor, a one-day official visit for the first time in 18 months, whatever it's been, when Tulsa transfer Caleb Evans, who, God, I can't even remember when his name first popped up on the scene. I was doing a little bit of internet sleuthing when his name hit the portal, noticed that he had a bunch of Texas guys following him. He looked like a guy based on, the trends of social media that the Longhorns would have an interest in. And sure enough, Evans, with scholarships remaining, has emerged as, obviously, they brought him in for an official visit. So he appears to be down to Texas, Missouri, Texas Tech, Notre Dame, and Jackson State. The Longhorns continue to look for defense in the portal. It never stops. It's either linebackers or defensive backs. Anwar, I don't know that I can say, give me your thoughts on Evans, and then you give me a 5-minute spiel on the pluses and minuses of him as a player. But your thought process of hearing that the Longhorns' first official visit in June is from a transfer from Tulsa that I don't know if he jumps in right away and is a starter on day one, because we thought Darian Dunn might be that kind of a player, and that hasn't quite happened. But there's no doubt that he started a lot of football, and he's a guy that would certainly give this team depth at cornerback's one of the most important positions in the entire program.
It's interesting, though, because what we thought prior to, the season and in this offseason, we would have thought Texas is really stacked at the DB position. We would have really thought, went down the list from one DB to another and said, okay, that's where one of their strengths are. And what's kind of happened is what we're seeing is Sarkisian and Bukowski came in and they've kind of said, nah, we need a little bit something more there. We need a little bit better depth and maybe even guys to push for playing time there. Because to your point, we understood linebacker was going to be something that they attacked. We understood that. All right. And that totally makes sense. But DB, I didn't necessarily see like that was going to be a point of emphasis. Like that would be something that they're absolutely said, this is what we have to have. But clearly with Evans and then everybody else that they have either pursued or tried to bring in, they look at DB as something that they can upgrade on this team. That I don't want to say necessarily a position of weakness, but they're going after more DBs than they have offensive linemen, and we would have definitely thought, okay, offensive line, you would have brought in at least a body. And we haven't really heard rumors about bodies that they're bringing in from offensive line. And I was just, before I went on vacation, I was in Houston, talking to Sarkisian, when he was at the Touchdown Club of Houston, and he seemed to be okay with the offensive line. Like he seemed to think like they're okay and they've got some bodies there and that they want to get bigger throughout time. But overall, he feels good about what they have there. So yeah, it's clear. It's clear that DB cornerback is a position of concern, a position that they feel like can be upgrades. And then it makes you wonder because, Ketch, you have to go back to some, and I'll toss it back to you. Some of the recruiting classes that we've seen over the past few years when we've thought that, man, Texas got and signed a lot of really, really great defensive backs. It seems like they've come in and said, they're okay, but we can use more.
Yeah, to your point about the offensive line, yesterday was kind of interesting in that one of maybe Jeff Choates, the new Texas co-DC linebackers coach, one of his best players at Montana State, a guy that was a freshman All-American and then an All-American as a sophomore at the FCS level, he put his name in the portal. And when you look at, he's a guy that's followed by both Choate and another member of the Texas staff, off one of the support staff members, but on the defensive side of the ball. And I thought, okay, well, this is a guy that we've seen that the guys that the coaches have had interest in, they've had connections to, whether or not they were on staff at this player's school or they recruited him. I mean, there have been some connections through the guys that they've landed that, makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, okay, it makes sense. They know this guy. They've seen him. And so this guy fell into that category. He's got a couple of staff members follow him on Twitter. And I thought maybe there would be something there, but so far, not really at all. It looks like Baylor's reached out. Texas Tech has reached out. What we had heard through our own sourcing was that Boise State, this kid's originally from Idaho. I think he's from the Boise area. So it would make sense that he would want to go back home potentially. Boise is a school thought to be the favorite to land him in the transfer portal. There had been, like I said, Baylor and Texas Tech are two schools that immediately put their name into the hat on day one. Texas, again, just not feeling it on the offensive line. They're clearly not sitting around waiting to pounce on the first. I mean, this guy probably has the same credentials as Evans. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, at the offensive line position, he's from a smaller school. Obviously, Tulsa's not an FCS school, but they didn't play football last year either. So they weren't they're not that major either. And Texas keeps on telling us where they want help in the transfer portal, and it's never the offensive line, ever. And so, it's almost getting to the point now, I feel like I should stop scouring the transfer portal names for the magical offensive lineman that pops up that Texas will have an interest in. And part of it is Texas isn't winning these recruiting battles. I mean, even with a Caleb Evans, the thought process is they have to beat Missouri because Missouri has his former DB coach at Tulsa at Missouri. And that feels like the main competition for his services. I don't want to say that Texas is somewhat slumming it in terms of their recruiting battles. I have had my eyes awakened by the reality of Texas's current standing in college football. What we've learned, I think, through the transfer portal over the course of the last 5 months or so is that the Texas brand does not carry as much weight with college players as it does with recruiting. And we already know that the brand in recruiting is suffering from just a decade of the same storylines and the same failures. They've had a hard time getting in the door with impact transfer guys, to the point where we talked about the USC linebacker leaning towards Texas. And then the moment that Ohio State, kind of enters the picture, Texas kind of falls out of the picture. I found it interesting, yesterday, Dele Adeoye comes back. He's been gone since the 8th of January. Anwar, 8th of January. Didn't participate in spring football. He takes his name out of the portal, and it would appear is back in the good graces with the coaching staff, to the point where he appears to be back in the program. That, to me, is a sign that the linebacker transfer help that they want isn't available. So why not bring the guy that left the program 6 months ago, missed the spring, but doesn't count against your 25-man number and doesn't really put you in threat of an 85-man scholarship number? That is a hell of a story to me. I'm a bit flabbergasted that Adeoye is in the picture, but it continues to go to this theme, which is Texas wants to boost their personnel on the defensive side of the ball by any means necessary. And if it's not available in the portal through a different school, then take a guy in the portal that played for you, I guess technically for a week, he was a Sark player.
So you said a lot, right?
I know. I'm sorry.
That's okay. There's a couple of things I want to get to, because while you were doing that, I was doing some quick math, right? So you started talking about, the Texas brand, right? And before I get to Adeoye, and it's fascinating because we've done this before on Orange Blood's podcast, but we haven't necessarily done that here. When we think about Vince Young and that national championship game in 2006, we realize that was 15 years ago. So when we start talking about what kids are seeing or don't see, that means an 18-year-old recruit was 3 years old.
At best.
At best. For my kid who's out here in the living room there. At best, if he's 18. If he may not have been born, potentially, right? If you go back to Colt McCoy, the 2009 season, we're talking about 12 years ago. So we're talking about, at best, they were 6 years old. Now, Ketch, you have young kids. I have young kids. They don't remember when they're 6. They don't remember what happened at 3. 3. You try to show them pictures of stuff. They're like, we went there? We did what? That's one of the reasons why I went down to Florida. Ain't no damn way I was going to go to Disney World, because I'm like, my youngest son is not going to remember it. I'm not going to spend that kind of cash. So when you start talking about the Texas brand, you're talking about kids who they're recruiting who were 3 to 5 years old when Texas was actually a national brand, when they were actually nationally relevant. So when you want to talk about the problems and the struggles that they're having, you're talking about a generation of kids who haven't really seen it. They're not watching the Longhorn Network. Go ahead, Ketch.
Well, I was going to say that is, and I'll let you get back because I did say a lot to respond to, but one of the things that Sark has to rebuild, that I guess was going to happen at some point, is the brand that, it is falling slightly on deaf ears to a certain extent when Texas starts talking about championships. Like, I think these kids, it's white noise to some of them, because for them, it's the same as talking about going back to the moon. It's something that they've heard about. They've seen the video of Neil Armstrong, but it isn't something that in their world, as they've ever known it, is relatable. And I just think that Texas fans, that is a lot of Texas fans. Sark probably even took this job not quite understanding the depth of which the brand is really taking a hit. And once upon a time, the brand really stood for something. And right now, it doesn't stand for enough that when Texas puts its, whatever on the table in front of these transfers specifically, they're all like, thanks, I appreciate it. But it isn't the same as Ohio State. It isn't, and it's not even necessarily this, we always talk about it in that top tier, Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson. The reality is there's that next tier below them that I don't know that Texas is completely registering as. And one of the things that Sark's going to have to do very early, if it's going to work out for Sark, he's going to have to win and reestablish this thing and get kids thinking about Texas in some other form or fashion other than they always say a bunch of stuff, but they don't ever do. Texas is a talker and not a doer. And if you're one of these big time kids, especially a college transfer that wants to be an NFL player, that wants to upgrade from where they've come from, they want to go to schools that do and not to those that only talk.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, it's a generational thing, right? If you talk about how do you communicate that to young people, that would be like us. I was thinking of it like that would be like us having a conversation about the hip hop music that we used to listen to today's generation. And they're like, what the hell are you talking about? And as great as like for us, like, you weren't like a huge DMX fan, but maybe like Busta Rhymes, right? We can, to us, like, wow, Busta Rhymes is amazing. Try to talk to a young kid, they're like, he raps too fast. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? Master P was like an amazing rapper for like a period of time, right? No Limit Soldier was everywhere. There's nobody who would vibe to that right now. I mean, so there's like a generational thing and now we listen to their music and we're just kind of lost, right? So it's how do you connect that to your point? Like the brand it's struggling because it has been a generation that really hasn't seen Texas. And when they've seen the Big 12, what they've seen is Oklahoma, right? To a certain degree, if you're talking about the last decade, they saw other programs in the Big 12 that were better than Texas. So Texas has the name, Texas has the hype, Texas has all those things. But we've said this before, the biggest indicator that the brand had taken a hit to me was the Brockermeyers. When the legacy, we have a legacy family that says, you know what? Yes, grandfather went here, father went here, mother went here. They're going past UT stuff all throughout the house. That's all they grew up on. And then like, yeah, we're good. We're going to go ahead to Alabama because we just want to win. Like that to me is like, that. Okay, well, the brand taking a hit. Because Ketch, you remember there was a time, and you could probably speak on this, when Mac Brown was recruiting, and it was just like he was choosing who he wanted. It was just, and then everybody else, to your point, you used to say, everybody else would get the leftovers. Like Mac Brown would get his guys, and then everybody else took what was left over, took the scraps. And now Texas is, they're fighting for a guy. And then look, there's no disrespect to Evans. I can't say I've seen you seen him as a player. I've only seen the highlights, but they're fighting right now to get a guy from Tulsa. So, who might be one hell of a player. Again, no disrespect to him, but this is where they're at to a point where Sark has to rebuild, and what Sark has to get back is, a brand that resonates with these kids. It just can't come to Texas because you get a great degree, you get the great diploma. These kids don't care about that. Their parents do. These kids, what did they say, Ketch? I'm going to spend the next 3 to 4 years at such and such school.
That's what they even say for.
Yes, correct, right? That's all they're saying. Like they're thinking about. We have a kid who's going to Texas who opted out of his senior year of eligibility to play high school ball. And one of the things he's talked about was focusing on his NFL career. Like these kids are not thinking about the educational stuff. They're thinking, how can we win? And by the way, when you play in a conference when Oklahoma has won 6 straight, that's hard. That's hard. And so, so when we talk about, and we'll get to, a day away in a second. So when you start thinking about, and then you said this thing, and I feel like I'm like stealing a lot of your thunder here. But we'll know really for sure, not only from a transfer market standpoint, Ketch, from a recruiting standpoint, by the time we hit July or so, by the time the season or in August is everything's kind of getting ready to start. If Texas doesn't have a good haul, if Texas doesn't have, what would you say, Ketch? 8 guys committed? What would be a good number that you think they should have before the start of the season?
I don't know. It's hard to quantify. It really is. I'm from a recruiting standpoint. What does the landscape look like, say, on Labor Day? Because we're in a situation where half of the difference makers in the state are still available. So, especially the offensive line, none of those guys have committed yet. If Texas only gets 2 more commitments between now and Labor Day, but they're both 5-star offensive linemen or national top 50 offensive linemen, cool, right? Like, it really is about getting the quality, the elite level quality, more so than I think it is number wise. But it's really tough to call. Like, so much will be known after these visits. I think what's really interesting, though, is a point that you made about, Maximus and his age.
Mm-hmm.
And when Herman, it's a subtle difference, but it matters. When Tom Herman arrived and you did the Vince Young thing, like, those kids were like 7. And then when we bring up the Colt McCoy thing, they were like 10. Think about Sam Ehlinger in those pictures. He's a great kid to remember, right? That 2005 team, that would have been right about the time he takes that picture where he's doing the double hook 'em that we saw on television for 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And when Colt came around, he would have been about 10 years old. And when Texas came calling, that's a kid who's a diehard.
Yes.
But he would have been old enough at that point to have a memory of Texas, to be in the 5th grade and remember going the first time he went to a college football. He can remember that stuff. Sark, it's weird to say 4 years later, things are completely different, but we have hit that watermark, I think, where, now it really is a struggle. A kid might have been 6 the last time that Texas won a Big 12 championship is a big deal than 10.
If you're a parent, you totally understand what those few years really, really mean from a memory standpoint.
Yeah. So I just think that, I've always wondered when it would happen, if it would ever happen, right? Because I came into Sark's arrival saying Texas will get a top 5 recruiting class because that's what always happens. I mean, Herman did it. And I don't think Herman's as good as Sark, but the Texas brand meant a little more in 2017 than it means in 2021. That's the problem when you continue to lose. And, when you look at, if we go back and talk about a Caleb Evans, that's a kid who's from Texas. He's from McKinney. So you should be able to go in and say, hey, you want to come back home? We have a spot for you. And it may very well be that he does jump on it when it's all said and done. But the Texas brand isn't so big that it means more that the DB coach automatically at Missouri, who recruited him at Tulsa, like, if this was Alabama, it'd be like, sorry, coach, I got something bigger. I love you. Otherwise I might come to Missouri, but like, I'm coming up in the world and my options are different than where you are. And I'm sorry about that. Texas used to create that kind of reaction. And when you look at a Caleb Evans, and look, he's going to visit Notre Dame. So it's not like Texas is the only big time school, but the schools that round up the rest of that top 5 are Missouri, Texas Tech, and Jackson State.
Dion.
And Dion's got it. Dion has himself in the top 5 because he's got a teammate that is also transferring out of Tulsa, and they'd like to go in together as a package deal, this kid named Allie Green. Nobody else has offered them as a package other than Jackson State, which is why they're in the top 5. But Texas is battling some stuff that it shouldn't matter. They should be able to go to a Caleb Evans and say, just like they do with any big-time recruit, right? Like, all these big-time kids they're recruiting have teammates that want to go play college ball, but they rarely end up playing with their more heralded teammates because their more heralded teammates got to do what they got to do. That Texas doesn't feel like I got to do what I got to do automatically to a Caleb Evans is really interesting. And look, Georgia yesterday pulls a couple of 5-star level commitments. Now, look, both of them are tricky. The tight end from LSU, I don't know if he knows how to read and write. Like, his academics are supposed to be so terrible that allegedly, I mean, I don't know. I'm only going on what I heard. I don't want this kid being like, Ketch said I couldn't read and write and I'm going to sue him. But allegedly, this guy's got serious grade question marks. Mm-hmm. So much so that most of the schools in the SEC backed off. But Georgia didn't. Georgia's going to find a way. This Deion Kendrick kid, who is a future NFL player who's transferring from Clemson, he commits. I don't know that Texas could have touched either of those guys because the kid from Clemson has baggage in terms of an offseason arrest. The other kid's got academic issues. But I bring those two kids up because I'm thinking of definite winners this year in the transfer portal. It doesn't feel like Texas is a winner. I'm not saying they haven't gotten help, but when you compare what Oklahoma's done in the portal, they're 4th or 5th. It's funny. They got this kid that transferred from Arkansas that's a wide receiver. Arkansas fans are still pissed about that. They thought that guy was a future star. And he's like the 3rd or 4th kid even mentioned at Oklahoma. It's kind of an afterthought because they've got other players who've stepped in who are expected to have even bigger roles this season. And, Texas just has not been able to land not even one true difference maker, one guy that we go, that guy's got a chance to come in and be an all-conference player. But it does feel like the Alabamas of the world, the Ohio States of the world, the Georgias of the world, the Oklahomas of the world have been able to improve their team in that kind of way. It feels like going through an NFL draft without a first-round draft pick, if that makes any sense, and then having a rookie class and you're depending on your guys to come in and be immediate impact guys. But it's harder to do that when you're only drafting in day 2 and in day 3. And to use an NFL draft-ism, watching Texas go to battle for a Caleb Evans late because they have room speaks to the type of NFL draft class their transfer class would be, I think. And it is what it is, but when Oklahoma goes to Big 12 Media Day next month and you're there, they're going to have Lincoln Riley's going to have a ton of questions about the quality of players that he's been able to bring in through the transfer portal. And I think the questions that Sark is going to get is not, are these guys going to be All-Americans for you? It's going to be, can these guys really help you? And that subtle difference really needs to change if you're Texas, and it's not going to occur in this offseason. And it does somewhat temper the improvement that I thought could take place in the program through the portal had things gone a little better than they have.
It seems like we're back to the place that I joke with Jason all the time on the podcast, but we're getting close to, I've got to see them do it on the field before I commit. And the problem is, since I've been here, because one of the things I'm going to write about for my Sunday pulpit. So anything we say, Catch, it's all yours, because it's not what I'm going to focus in on. So I won't steal anything from you, starting on the legal spot. Not yet, but no, I'm reflecting on like my 7 years. Like the beginning of June 1st has actually marked my 7 years of being at Orange Bloods, and I'm gonna like reflect on some of the things in the 7 years. But one of the common themes since I have been here has been every year it's been, well, these recruits just want to see Texas win on the field, and if they see Texas win on the field, then they'll go ahead and commit. And look, I'm not saying Texas hasn't had some good classes that have been, highly ranked.
No, they have.
They have. So they've been able to do it, but hasn't been always as consistent, the way as you would want it. But, Tom Herman had 2 top 5 classes, so he was able to pull that off to a certain degree. But I think we got to go back to one of those classes. Which class did we look at, Catch? It was like the 2018 or 2017 class. One of those, it was.
The 2018 class was the one that was a top 5 class, but it was a little bit like Charlie's 2015 class, and that it was top 5 on paper the day that it signed, but it's proven to be far more problematic in terms of actual returns than you would have guessed going in. And, it's interesting. There'll be people who will listen to this and think that we're being negative. And it's like, no, man, we're talking about a Tulsa transfer that Texas isn't shooting from the layup line with. And it's hard to have a conversation about the program and recruiting and the portal without acknowledging this has proven to be a little harder than I have to believe they thought it would be. And, another example, Jeff Banks. Mm-hmm. He's one of the best recruiters in the country, but we're 6 months in, and it's not like there's Banks fever on campus with recruits. And, I don't know how it's going to turn out. It may be that I end up being right, and it may end up being that I end up being wrong with the quality of this class. It goes back to, what do I need to see in August? By August, they do need to have some returns that have them going in the direction of a top 5 class, because names are going to start coming off of the board in recruiting. And here's another thing you've heard for 7 years. Once a kid commits, we'll flip them. And the reality is Texas, that's not impossible to do, but with the elite kids, it happens far less than I think Texas fans realize. That even when Charlie and Herman were flipping kids, they weren't flipping 5-star kids. They weren't flipping national top 70 kids. And
they flipped PJ Locke, right? Who was going to go to Oregon, but who had Texas posters in his room. So, and PJ Locke wasn't a 5-star kid, right? Now
they're trying to flip the PJ Locks of the world, and those kids didn't grow up with Texas posters in their locker room. And it goes back to this thing we've kind of circled around a couple of times. We are finally at a point where regardless of who the coach would be, we've reached a point where the glory years are so far back in the rearview mirror that mentioning them to these kids just isn't as romantic sounding as and impactful as I think even 6 months ago Texas fans thought it would. I thought it would be. Like, I'm telling you, I feel I'm a little sheepish about my top 5 recruiting class pick. Not based on anything I've seen really in recruiting, just reading the landscape and the tea leaves of how kids are responding. And this staff's going to have to be elite as recruiters to overcome that. The good news is, if there's a staff that can do it, Texas has hired it. They've hired guys that they've got 7 coaches on their staff that have been in the playoffs or in a national championship setting in the last 5 years. That's amazing, really. Yeah. And just a couple of years ago, Herman had 2. So the quality of this staff is without question better. I think their chops as recruiters unquestionably better. They're going to need to be, because I think staffs with lesser quality and lesser chops on the recruiting trails were able to accomplish things that might be harder to do. This staff's going to have to be. And I don't know. I can't wait to get to the season and we can this feels very off-season-ish, but what this team, forget about recruiting this year for a second. This program has to start taking steps forward. And I'm fearful of what an 8-4, 9-3 season does with all of the narratives of things that we're talking about, because it does feel very close to show us on the field. It would represent the shortest honeymoon of any head coach that I've ever seen hired at either Texas or Texas A&M. And it would be a new precedent, right? So the next time, in theory, that a hire was made, everything that I would think about what a hire at one of these two schools means might feel different based on what happens here. And I just didn't think Sark was walking into that. I thought Sarkisian was walking into a better place. He might be. I just don't know. And whereas 6 months ago, I definitely thought he was, watching the recruitments of kids like a Caleb Evans and, the Ben Davises of the world and the Ray Thorntons of the world and the guys that Texas has had to settle for in the transfer portal, is an ominous cloud leading up to this recruiting process. It just is.
I think Texas would tell you that they've got Devin Richardson, right? And they would tell you that they feel pretty good about that.
But he had no other major offers. Texas was his first major. And I love Devin Richardson. I think from an evaluation standpoint, they did a great job there. Not everybody's combing through New Mexico State, but they didn't beat anybody out for that kid.
Sure. Okay. But, I'm just saying, I think what they would say, right? I think They would say, Texas, they've got Devin. There's two things I'm thinking of, right? Devin Richardson. They loved Ray Thornton in the spring and was praising him. Players were praising him. But here was something else really interesting, Ketch, when I was back in Houston last week. And it's all coming back to me, right? I'm coming out of vacation mode. And this is kind of be one of the last things I'll say on it is when I was talking to Sarkisian and we were talking about the transfer portal. It was interesting because one of the things that he talked about for the transfer portal was he seemed like to not like it that much, because one of the things he talked about is he felt like it was taking away scholarships from high school players. And it didn't seem to be something that he wanted to lean on going forward, because he really felt like he wanted to make sure like the high school players were being taken care of. And so this seems like maybe for him, just kind of like a 1-year fix, maybe a Band-Aid of sorts, of trying to just, put just some patchwork, but it doesn't seem like to be something that he's indicating that he's going to lean on going forward. Like it looks like he's going to try to lean on his recruiting going forward. So we'll see what happens with the transfer portal in the upcoming seasons. Obviously, you're always going to have a need. You're always going to have to fill it somehow through the transfer portal. But
Anwar, what else would he say? Like if he'd come out it was last Wednesday, right, when you were in Houston?
Yes.
If he'd come out last Wednesday and been like, guys, I got to admit, I thought we had championship capacity as a program this year. We hadn't been able to do shit in the portal. Like these other schools are getting impact players, and I'm having to get settled for these 5th and 6th year guys that hadn't played you know what I mean? Like,
you mean like when Charlie came out in his first year and then he was doing this tour and he said, we're not going to compete for a championship?
I mean, I just feel like this feels a little bit like me as a high schooler being like, yeah, man, I'm not really trying to date any of the cheerleaders. Like, I think it's best for me if I focus on the band and the girls like in home economics or something, I don't know. And it ignores the fact, well, you asked the cheerleaders.
You just took a shot at all the women in the band. There may be some hot women in the band.
Dude, I like women in the band. Do not think I'm dismissing.
Okay.
Women in the band. The girls in the band in high school are where it's at.
Swimmers, okay. I mean, when we were in high school, Catch. Let's preface that though.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying when I was I don't think things have changed.
I just don't want you to be on To Catch a Predator. I just want you to be really specific.
I ain't worried about catching a predator. I'll bring them in and be like, if you want to catch a predator, go hang out in the band and with the swim team, because that is always where the crazy people are. But it ignores the fact that potentially you've asked all the cheerleaders out. They didn't want to go out with you. And so what do you do then? Well, I don't know how much I'm going to spend time on cheerleaders. When I hear Sark saying that, it just sounds like something a guy says when he's not winning. Because they offered Eric Gray, the running back that ended up going to Oklahoma from Tennessee. If he'd come to Texas, along with the left tackle that went with him, and if they'd gotten the PK Nate Ote from USC, and we were looking at the athletic.com's top 50 list of portal guys, and Texas had 5 names on the list, like an Oklahoma almost does, I just feel like his attitude would be different about it. At that point, he'd be saying, we think every year we can go out and get 3, 4, 5 guys that can really come in, and then maybe not more than that, but we can go out every year, we think, and get guys that can immediately help our team. The truth of the matter is, and look, we'll wrap this thing up because we can just keep going on and on and on and on. Last thing I'll say about it is this. The math on the high school kids is something that I have stressed time and time and time again. You get a 5-star guy, you're talking about a 50-50 proposition or better that he's going to emerge as an NFL caliber player. You go to a tier below that and it drops down to like the 33% range, which is still really good. You go to the tier below that and then it drops into 1 out of 5. So when Sark starts talking about his high school recruiting in comparison to the portal, I don't know how to quantify portal transfers yet. There's no data, but I know that in recruiting, unless you're landing the elite of the elite, the amount of time that it will take to probably get your program off the ground through high school kids is longer, right? I mean, I don't know what Sark's ramp up point is at Texas, I guess. He's got, the key will be quarterback. Get a great quarterback and everything else will kind of fall into place. But the rest of the program from a talent standpoint isn't where it needs to be. And when I heard Sark say that last Wednesday, unless they really knock it out of the park in recruiting, his program will look more like, I don't want to say Washington, because God, I think they were winless the year that he showed up, but it took 3 or 4 years of build-up time. Same thing with USC. He wasn't there long enough to really ride that wave, but it wasn't happening overnight at USC. He didn't go there in the first year and win 10 games, but he did have a top 5 recruiting class. He had a number 1 ranked recruiting class. And I don't know. I don't even know how to end it other than saying I'm a bit perplexed at all of this. I hope nobody listens to this and thinks that I'm saying that I have all the answers. What I'm saying is that I don't have any of the answers yet. And what I think is different now versus in previous years, I would have thought I would know the right recipe. I don't. Maybe Sark is right. I just don't know that he's right. And I know that his comments come in the wake. It's not because they haven't tried in the transfer portal. Oh, they've tried. They've tried with a lot of guys. They're not winning in the transfer portal. So him going out of his way to make the transfer portal not seem like a big deal doesn't exactly reflect his actions. I mean, if you're worried about high school kids, Why even recruit a Caleb Evans at all? Save that spot and go get a highly ranked cornerback in this class. But they did bring him in. They are offering him. He's one of, God, I don't know how many guys they've offered, but they're in double digits in offers, significantly into double digits. So he can say he doesn't like it, but his actions reflect there's a way he could like it a lot more. It just hasn't worked out that way.
Okay, well, I'll let you wrap it up, man.
All right, well, look, good to be back with Anwar on the Orange Bloods YouTube channel. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. Either of those will do. If you did both, Anwar and I will come like personally, in person, thank you. No, we won't do that. But we'll say it on the air. We'll be like, hey, thank you. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for liking the video. Thank you for watching all of this. We've meandered through this for longer than I think we thought we were. For Anwar Richardson and myself, we'll do it again soon. Later.